Apart from the performers and the stories that they tell, there are some other ingredients that recur in nearly everything I do. The audience, of course, and also the darkness and the light. And I have a light bulb over here. And I've never done this before, but I'm going to try to build a little stage set live here and now. So I'm going to put this light in. I'm going to hope that it switches on, which it does. This is a good beginning. And I'm going to focus my light, which is not something I normally do either. There's normally lots of people doing this for me, but I'm going to do it myself. Focus this light into a little slot, like this. Looks quite straight. And now I'm going to try and build a stage set. I'm going to use these bits of cardboard, which are just what you see, some crude little Blue Peter style bits of cardboard here. And this one's going to go on this side, like this. And then this one's going to go over here. I'm going to stick it together with a little bit of Velcro like that. Sneaky bit of Velcro inside. Et voila. You happy with that, Rich? I've got my friend Rich here, and he's going to spend some time teaching this little projector how to understand everything it needs to know about these little bits of cardboard while I'm talking. The mechanics of set design consists largely in the relationship between the audience, the darkness, and the light. They arrive, the audience, at a theatre already, I think, predisposed to discern miracles. They take their seats, and they're prepared always to suspend their disbelief. I'm interested to think a little bit about what are the mechanics of the suspension of disbelief. When was the first time that humans ever suspended their disbelief? And what were the mechanics that allowed them to do it? I wonder if it began with the first firelight at night. The first fires I have read in my simple Googling research were lit 350,000 years ago in caves in northern Israel. Once humans had discovered fire, perhaps they stayed awake longer. Perhaps they discerned things in the dark. In a way, the first projections would have been the moving firelights and shadows on the walls of a cave. One of the first set designs might have been this. It's a python carved out of rock, maybe 70,000 years ago, in a cave by the San people in the Tsodilo Hills in Botswana. In the San creation myth, humans are descended from a giant python. Behind this carved snake, there's a little hollow chamber where the shaman would have sat, and he could enter and exit unseen from the mountains. Fires may have been lit underneath it, and you can imagine that as the flames flickered on those carved scales, the illusion of an animated snake would have occurred, with the shaman hidden behind, providing a soundtrack. Has all the ingredients for contemporary set design: a light in the dark, a congregation witnessing an illusion, a suspension of disbelief. I grew up in rural Sussex and Kent. And I spent my Saturdays outside with bonfires and my Sundays inside in dark churches lit by stained glass. I think this was probably the earliest form of projection, a kind of early movie making. These ones are, in fact, the beautiful Chagall stained glass windows in Chudley in Kent. Sunlight, interrupted by lead and black paint as a means of telling stories, creation myths, afterlife myths, to a congregation gathered in the dark. I think I began to discern the differing qualities of stories being told in different lights. Stories around a fire, stories at church, stories at school under fluorescent lights, or at home by a tungsten bedside lamp. A lighting designer is in some ways like a pharmacist dispensing drugs to an audience. He can calibrate the way an audience will feel by the choice of light source. Firelight will make us respond differently to a story than stained sunlight, or LED light, or tungsten light. And then there's calibration of the dosage. Too much will overexpose the illusion, break the spell. Too little will simulate nighttime too much, or will send a theatre audience to sleep. The Victorian illusionists, I'm going to show you a picture of some Victorian illusionists. There's the beautiful Chudley windows. They taught us to calibrate the aperture of each individual iris in every eye in the audience. To create true illusory-worthy darkness on stage, you need to point a frame of lights right into the eyes of the audience, to shrink the iris of every eye so that they perceive less movement in the dark stage within that frame of lights. See these lines all around, lights all around the proscenium to blind you. Still use it today, actually. And the performance spaces that I design for now have evolved primarily from two distinct architectural paradigms. This one, the proscenium theatre, and this one, the Greek amphitheatre. And I think these two forms of architecture are conducive to two different types of miracle. In the amphitheatre, the audience behaves as though gathered round a campfire. They're aware of themselves as protagonists in the event, eligible to participate in the ritual themselves. This is some of the work I've done in these type of amphitheatre arena spaces. And I find actually my main role in this work is not to fuck it up. Because the audience have already turned up with everything they need. This is a small one at the Donmar Warehouse. This is Kanye and Jay-Z on Watch the Throne. The audience for these type of shows have spent hours on the telephone queuing to get their seats. They've saved up for months to pay for them. They've often come on planes and trains, and they've sometimes slept outside on the street. I see them queuing outside. So as long as you don't fuck it up, they provide pretty much everything you need. This is the Beyoncé tour that's out at the moment. And Kanye's latest show, Pablo, he's sort of taken the campfire to the extreme in that there isn't really a stage. He floats around on this platform, but the protagonist of the show is clearly the crowd, the entirely full. There isn't any space of this arena that's given over to staging. And the lighting is as close to firelight as you can safely tour around sporting arenas. It's entirely tungsten incandescent lights. Then the other spaces I design for are this type, the proscenium, the Victorian proscenium. And for me, they have something in common with the stained glass window. The audience are invited not so much to participate, but to observe through this frame, through this window, what's going to be delivered to them. So this is some early work for Rambert Dance Company, playing on the stained glass window. dispensing the light to the audience, calibrating how much light the audience will see in any given scene. Here's a recent piece for the Royal Ballet, a work with Sally Potter at the English National Opera. The stained glass windows pretty much all the way, actually. And this is Don Giovanni at the Royal Opera House. Portraits. Sometimes I feel like the pieces I make for contemporary musicians are like portraits in stained glass made of LED. This is the previous one was Parsifal, and this is Carnier's Jesus show. They look quite similar, the Wagner and the Carnier in some ways. In some ways, I think the proscenium theatre has already evolved beyond itself into cinema, the ultimate illusion. And then cinema itself has shrunk and became TV, and then TV shrank and became iPhone screens and now live in all of our hands. This is a photo I took of someone watching the Adele show through their screen. Here they are. Sometimes I wonder if the current popularity of large-scale concerts has something to do with this omnipresence of a video phone. Sometimes to me it feels like the phones are buying the tickets and just using the human hands as a ride to the venue and as a seat to allow them a really clear view of the show. For now, the phones are like children that need to be carried and pointed to look. But I wonder if, like children, the phones will grow up and end up leading us by the hand. I had been watching a lot of concerts recently. I hadn't been going to the theatre too much, and I went to see the Harry Potter show. And it told me I had to turn my phone off. And I was a little surprised. I hadn't turned my phone off for a while, so I turned it off. I zipped it into my bag, and I felt like I was shutting a child into a car. My phone looked really upset. I thought it was going to cry. It was irritated because for the next 3 hours I was planning to deny its right to be part of the great flow of information through the collective consciousness of all of us. I recently designed a set for the new play at the Royal Court Theatre. It was called The Nether. It envisaged a future world in which the planets become depleted of trees and animals and humans emigrating to live inside the internet, because the internet's become a nicer place to live. The trees and animals were created by code and are more real than the originals that anyone can remember. The set design needed to switch really rapidly between a bleak real world and a rich virtual world. It was done with an aperture that had to open and close at a precise speed. We found when we transferred the show to the West End that it didn't actually work anymore. The audience didn't suspend their disbelief anymore. At the Royal Court, this was a collection of fake plastic trees, some smoke, and some really cheap, crappy plastic mirrors. But somehow it worked. And we discovered that the reason it wasn't working anymore was a 2-second difference in the speed of this aperture moving. That 2 seconds was just too long for this writing to sustain an audience disbelief. People often ask set designers, what happens to the set after the show? And when I tell them, well, it gets destroyed, or it goes back into its constituent parts. This projector's going to go back to the projector shop. This cardboard I'll probably chop up into something else. And people say, aren't you devastated that nothing remains, that you've got nothing to show for it? And I always say, well, actually, this is the least of my worries. This is not of any meaning in itself. It only has meaning as part of a constellation of this projector, this object, me, this stage, you. After that, it doesn't have meaning anyway. So the only meaning this little thing's going to have is in your memories, if you remember it. Are you ready, Rich? You sure? Okay, I'm going to see if this is going to work. First time ever, live created on stage. If we could turn the lights down. We'll put on some nice John Hopkins music. Put on John. Okay, let's see if it's going to work. very much. Thank you, Rich.